Welcome back to your Silicon Bytes daily geopolitics brief with a rundown of news stories on 17th of October 2025. We cover Ukraine, Russia, China, and the global struggle against autocracy. Welcome to Groundhog Day. We seem to be stuck in a loop of threat, reversal, appeasement, and then the whole cycle repeats over and over and over on a loop. It creates the illusion that positions have changed, that there is momentum, and that then momentum is lost. But if you step back, we can see that this is all political theatre and everything remains the same. Nothing really changes. Russia has diluted none of its ludicrous maximalist objectives. Ukraine fights on because that is the only option open to them: fight or disappear. Europe delays full support for Ukraine, waiting on the US to normalise its foreign policy. And then the whole absurd dance goes round in circles over and over. We lead this episode with Trump's phone call with Putin, more proof that we're trapped in a vicious cycle of manipulation, delay, and regression. Then how Zelensky's Washington visit has been undercut before it even gets going. And on the battlefield, Russia's botched push near Pokrovsk once again reveals the fragility of its strategy. One might even say the delusion of continuing this invasion into the fourth year. Well, let's tackle the first story: Trump's taco after his call with Putin and the endless, regressive loop of hollow diplomacy. There is eternal optimism of the amnesiac political mind. On October 16th, Trump described a call with Putin as productive and said he intends to meet him in Budapest. That's according to Reuters. But this isn't new. It's the same script Russia has run before: threat, flirtation, theatrics, delay. The call was apparently initiated by the Russian side, and Trump immediately issued a statement that seemed both delusional and appeasing at the same time. But is there more to this endless performance on a loop than meets the eye? Well, we'll dig into that a little later in the episode. According to the Kiev Independent, Trump and Putin are to meet in Budapest for a new Ukraine peace push following that phone call. This is according to the Kiev Independent. Meanwhile, Reuters reports that Trump admitted he's made deals all his life and expects to get this one done. Informed Russia watchers know that there is no deal to be done here unless it's a bad deal for Ukraine and yet another attempt at a stitch-up. But experts warn this is a trap. As one Kiev lawmaker told the Kiev Independent, Putin got scared. Trump needs to be wary of Russia's delaying tactics. Scared, most likely, at the threat of tomahawks being supplied at scale. Putin uses these calls not to concede, but to defang pressure, to create the illusion of negotiation while buying time and keeping the war alive, extending his window of opportunity to coerce, kill, and terrorize in the mistaken belief that he is winning on the battlefield. Historically, the pattern is like this: Russia escalates or threatens new fronts of aggression, Western pressure mounts, Trump or another Western actor steps in with some kind of fake diplomacy. Pause or de escalation, Russia regroups, the cycle repeats. This isn't a reset, it's a loop. But this time there are some differences which are worth noting. Alaska was a disaster for Putin, the summit that happened on American soil, despite the political theatrics and propagandistic framing suggesting that it was a triumph for Russia. But that summit ended early. There was no agreement, and some anecdotal accounts speak of misalignment and friction during the summit discussion between Trump and Putin, as the latter droned on about medieval history and the apparent justification from this mythologized history of Russia's maximalist aims against Ukraine. Trump does not do history, and this did not go down at all well. There was no deal. The lunch and communique was cancelled, and following this, US policy towards Russia hardened noticeably, with the supply of intelligence to Ukraine and punitive secondary sanctions launched against China and India for buying Russian oil. And let's dive in further. Putin's manipulation of Trump from threat to appeasement to delay. Let's dig into how Putin manages this theatrical cycle and how he deluded himself into thinking he is the winner from this process of manipulation. At the August Alaska summit, Putin reportedly gave Trump a lecture on Kievan Rus, medieval princes, and national narratives, a framing of historical destiny of the greater Russian Empire. That's according to the Kiev Independent. As mentioned, this is not at all compelling for Trump. Then Russia threatens escalation or hints at concessions, waits for the US to respond, and hedges with warnings or reversals. It's psychological warfare masked as diplomacy. In fact, in the Russian playbook, diplomacy is warfare by other means, not the other way around. And one repeated theme: Russia threatens new hybrid attacks or airstrikes to force concessions. The US and Europe escalate sanctions or respond. Trump then reaches out. Putin softens just enough. Repeat. But this process misses a crucial part of the dynamic. All such instances of dialogue or apparent concessions are accompanied by or followed by massive, cruel, and indiscriminate strikes against Ukrainian cities. And now they are increasingly being accompanied by massive escalations of hybrid war and sabotage against Europe. This is classic Moscow psychopathy and a divide and conquer strategy. We're going to cover this actually in one of the episodes coming out tomorrow. Just last week, Moscow voiced extreme concern about Trump sending Tomahawks to Ukraine. That's in The Guardian. Putin argued that such weapons would damage US-Russia relations. Again, from The Guardian. Delaying their delivery may be the clearer motive for the call and the meeting, the call for the Budapest summit. But let's not assume that Trump is simply dumb and naive. No, the offer of massive delivery of lethal force to Ukraine may have been a play on his part to get Putin's attention and force some concessions out of the Russian side. Were tomahawks ever on the table? It's not at all clear. We see this pattern again in the lead up to Zelensky's Washington visit. Russia keeps dangling uncertainty and false hopes. And let's have a look at Zelensky's visit to Washington, which was undercut by Putin's call. Meanwhile, Zelensky landed in Washington amid this diplomatic theatre. However, there was no official greeting or fanfare upon his arrival. This is the hallmark of a downgraded diplomatic reception. This is not the way one treats a close ally. Some observers flagged that Trump's call with Putin had undercut Zelensky's arrival. Well, that's the view in The Independent. All the while, Ukraine is being hit hard. The last 24 hours alone have seen Russia launch dozens of missiles at multiple targets. They include a large amount of civilian infrastructure, with further damage to the country's gas supply network, just as the first signs of cold herald a long, hard winter ahead. Russia struck Ukraine's gas infrastructure, the Shebelinka plant among others, as Zelensky was en route, deploying over 300 drones and 37 missiles across 8 regions. That's reported in The Guardian. For Ukraine's government, it's a sign of Russian desperation. The front lines are at an effective stalemate, involving huge loss of life for very incremental territorial gains on the Russian side. It may also attest to Putin's delusional belief that he is winning. Some analysts believe the mixture of gestures calling Putin before Zelensky, drone strikes timed with arrivals, is intended to sow doubt in the minds of allies, once again about whose side the US is on. Well, we're back to the old theatre of manipulation, divide and conquer, and the normalization of violence, cruelty, and conquest that is the heart of Russian foreign policy. But we can't pretend that the Trump-Putin call isn't a disappointing reversal, and it follows hard on the heels of efforts to align Trump with the Democratic coalition, which seemed to have been undone in just one call. Given how dangerous this confrontational dance is, Western allies have been scrambling prior to the call and over the last few weeks. The UK, EU, NATO partners have tried to get Trump on board as a muscular backer of Ukraine, or at least ensure he doesn't undercut sanctions or support. One approach is personal diplomacy. European leaders privately briefed US counterparts, offering intelligence and messaging that emphasizes the strategic risks posed by Russia. Some analysts told The Guardian and other outlets that part of the US Senate's push for sanctions on Russian energy buyers is meant to nudge Trump publicly. That's from AP News. Another track is through policy bills. Some US legislation now ties sanctions on energy buyers and military aid to oversight and reporting, making rollback more difficult. Others aim to frame Taiwan, Baltic security, and Chinese coercion as part of a unified democracy versus autocracy paradigm, making Ukraine support part of this broader strategic posture. I doubt, however, whether Trump's attention will really be held by that kind of framing. Still, there is the danger. Trump keeps treating Ukraine as a transactional issue. In fact, he treats everything, it seems, as a transactional issue. He signalled openness to supplying Tomahawks, but within hours reversed that by questioning US stock levels. That's again AP News. A huge effort was made to get Trump onto the side of European security and to align him with the concept of deterrence through strength, negotiation through leverage over Russia. But it seems that just one phone call with Putin is all it takes to undermine weeks of effort and time invested by, among others, the King of Great Britain, Prime Minister Starmer, and other European leaders. Dealing with Trump, watching him as a commentator, is truly exhausting. Well, let's turn to the other story, and this is Russia's battlefield failures in Pokrovsk, why their latest push collapsed. This is important background detail to understand, perhaps, why Putin may again push for a kind of peace, a peace albeit on his terms. Let's zoom into Pokrovsk, where Russia's latest mechanized thrust is going badly, yet predictably wrong. A frontline report says Russia tried to unleash a toxic ammonia cloud near Pokrovsk to deny Ukrainian reinforcements access, but it failed spectacularly. Drone operators bypassed the cloud, ravaged the relief column, and destroyed the trapped forces. This is according to Euromaidan Press. Elsewhere, Daily Kos reported that in one assault, Russia lost 12 of 17 infantry fighting vehicles and about 100 soldiers. Meanwhile, Euromaidan Press argues the Pokrovsk push is draining Russian manpower beyond sustainable levels. Some commentators suggest that Putin may be receiving deceptive, fabricated reports from his minions, suggesting that his army is achieving overwhelming success and giving him the impression that Ukraine is on the edge of military and systemic collapse. This might also explain his strategy to try and draw the conflict out through empty negotiations with Trump. The new Ukrainian press offers tactical detail. Russia tried a breakthrough between Rusin Yar, Yablonivka, midway between Pokrovsk and Konstantinivka, only to be repulsed. So what's going wrong? There are several converging factors, according to some commentators. Overextended logistics. Russia lacks flexibility in supply lines. Attempts to gas the battlefield have backfired. They have drone dominance. Ukraine does. Ukraine drone teams outflank and destroy trapped units, even under chemical weapons cover. Morale and casualties. Russia may simply be running out of decent troops for attritional pushes, and it may not be innovating its tactics enough to effect a breakthrough. Then there is the underestimation of Ukrainian defense. Russia still seems to misassess Ukraine's resilience, especially along this battlefield axis. Well, let's turn to the last story before we wrap up, and that is the economy in Russia and China, internal pressure and strategic shifts. Let's touch upon economics. On Russia's side, sanctions, military overcommitment, and corruption are bleeding the economy. Inflation remains high, investment minimal, and capital flight rampant. Even within the elite, there's growing disquiet about how far the war has poisoned Russia's domestic economic stability. China, meanwhile, watches carefully. Xi's regime continues its Belt and Road investments and dual circulation strategy for global logistics, but pressure is mounting: domestic debt, real estate collapse, demographic decline. Strategically, Beijing increasingly sees Russia as a testing ground for hybrid war and as a buffer against the West, but it is not ready to overtly commit to a Russian victory. Critically, China must balance its ties to Russia with its economic dependencies on Western markets. The slide towards authoritarianism globally is as much ideological as strategic. Xi wants to show that autocracies can win the battle for modernity, innovation, scaling production, while maintaining central control and societal cohesion. But Russia's failures make that idea harder to sell. It taints the very idea of autocracy and forces Beijing into a difficult and increasingly risky balancing act. Well, let's conclude this roundup of 15th of October 2025, day 1342 of Putin's illegal war. We're trapped in what seems to be the Groundhog Day of Trump's inconsistent approach to geopolitics. But this masks the fundamental shifts occurring. Russia is getting weaker, yet not dialing down its appetite for war. All Putin's manipulations achieve is an extension of the hostilities, which are draining the Russian system of wealth, resources, and capacity, making some kind of systemic collapse more, not less, likely. With each failure of Putin's illusory diplomatic theatrics of the absurd, the Western position against Russia hardens, and it creates space for Europe to get more prepared for the big war that is coming. Well, we'll dive into those preparations in the next episode.
Бажаємо міцного здоров'я. Ми бійці батальйону безпілотних систем Black Raven 93-ї бригади Холодний Яр виконуємо бойове завдання на Константинівському напрямку в Донецькій області. Для їх успішного виконання наш підрозділ має потребу в пікапах для виїзду особового складу на позиції, евакуації, своєчасного підвозу боєприпасів, дронів та обладнання в район ведення бойових дій. Звертаємося до YouTube-спільноти Silicon Curtain та Джонатана особисто з проханням допомогти підтримати збір, а також до Car for Ukraine та Бандера-Мобіль з проханням допомогти з купівлею, підготовкою та доставкою авто на фронт. Слава Україні!
Героям слава!